And joining me now are two members of the group PEF Proud, which was involved in organizing the opposition to the contract. Andy Coates and Wayne Bear are both executive board members for PEF. Thank you very much for being here. Wayne, thank you. Andy, thanks very much for being here. I guess I just want to start out by, and you should start, Andy, by saying PEF Proud was actually not a hugely funded organizing effort, but you did support the efforts of folks who were in opposition?
Well, it's a very modest blog. We made it a repository of places where leaflets that PEF members were making against the contract could be found and downloaded and shared. At the time of the contract vote, only 2,000 people had looked at that blog, and we don't know who they were.
Yeah, like 5 of it might have been me.
So, precisely.
So there you go.
Nearly 20,000 PEF members voted against the contract. So we're with them. I think we understand the motivations for voting no, but hardly the lead organizing effort.
You know, please, go ahead.
One other relevant point, I think, is that we had discussions about creating this blog before the tentative agreement was reached, because we thought there was a number of issues that had to be discussed and followed up on in terms of the demonization of public services and attacking public employees.
Right.
So that was the original concept behind that, was to start to get some information and help with a fight back on that effort.
You know, I think that it's difficult for folks who are not union members, not if PEF or CFEA or any particular organization, to understand how contract negotiations work, and the idea that you would actually reject a contract knowing that there will be people sacrificed at the other end when you cast that ballot. I mean, could you talk a little bit about the rationale of why that was done?
Well, this contract was extremely difficult for the PEF members. I think the PEF members were damned if we do and damned if we don't. Our leadership bargained in very good faith. The governor bargained in the press. There was one ultimatum after the next, and at a certain point the PEF negotiating team felt that they had done the very best they could and proposed that the contract be put before the membership.
So you don't blame the leadership, is what you're saying?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
But I felt that it became a choice of lesser evils. And the PEF members are professionals. They're the professional, scientific, and technical part of the state. Wayne just mentioned that we think that we feel disrespected. The public employees who are professionals, highly educated, highly skilled, highly trained, credentialed, we know that we make less than our private sector counterparts when you take into account our education, our age, our longevity especially, and gender. And there are studies that have shown this. So the idea that the public employees are lavishly paid is absolutely false.
Okay, but you did know, do you think that the percentage of folks who voted no were probably the folks who had time in and knew that they were probably protected? I mean, the people who are going to leave...
I don't think that that's true. I think that the people who voted no were, and this is in my experience from talking to my fellow PEF members,
right.
They were from all walks of life, and I think the major theme was feeling incredibly disrespected by the whole process and by the most recent years.
That would be not just the Cuomo administration, but what came up before the Cuomo administration.
So it becomes a question of professional dignity.
Do you think that does not apply to your brethren in CSEA? I mean, they approved this contract, right?
Well, I think that there's a difference between PEF and CSEA, and I think one of the differences between PEF and CSEA is PEF is perhaps the most, or one of the most democratic unions in this country. So every PEF member got the entire contract. I think the PEF members are the type of people who read the entire contract, who kept their own counsel, who weighed their choices themselves and made a considered decision. There was a 3-week process. There were over 100 meetings organized across the state. Thousands of PEF members took part in those discussions. And I think that that's the internal character of PEF.
Okay, let me ask you then, Wayne. The governor has now suggested that he's willing to have a conversation about tweaking, whatever that means, the contract. But he says it needs to be revenue neutral. I've heard some discussion about health care, maybe that there would be room for movement in the health care concessions that he sought from the workforce. Is there room for members to vote yes in the next round?
There's room, but it may involve more than tweaking. And I personally don't like that word tweak. There's a number of questions that we would have for the governor and the governor's staff. One of them is the agency attrition rate to date. We'd like to see what the breakdown is by each agency, how many of those reduction in state workforce numbers they've already achieved, and what is their projection over the next 2 years. We believe they can achieve a lot of them, through attrition.
You're particularly concerned about your agency, are you not?
Well, I am, and that's why I wear this button.
Right.
Not because I'm totally opposed to hydrofracking, but because there's no fracking way does DEC have enough staff currently to engage in a major new labor-intensive initiative, which high-volume hydrofracking would involve.
But the commissioner said as much, hasn't he? I mean, hasn't there been a sort of tacit acknowledgement that they will have to add back staff if, in fact, that goes forward?
Show me the money.
No.
I mean, there's been some lip service to that, but at the moment we don't have the bodies. We're down 25 to 30% from our high point, 15 years ago. And each year, the state legislature, the federal legislators added new statutory and regulatory responsibilities. They haven't added a commensurate amount of staff. They haven't taken anything away from our agency in terms of what our mission and task are. So,
and in the unit that I know best that serves the mentally ill, the layoffs plus recent retirements, because this contract negotiation was also a huge retirement incentive.
Right, and there
not
have been
carrot.
incentives also in the Patterson administration, weren't they?
It wasn't not a carrot incentive, it was a stick incentive.
Oh, I
Because
see.
the new contract would change the actuarial table for the retirees' health insurance contribution, which is the same as telling the retirees you're living too long. And so that kind of indignity, right, caused a whole wave of layoffs. I mean, retirements. If you add those recent retirements with the layoffs that I know about, it's 10% of the unit that
So
serves
if you
the
get
patient.
out first, just to be clear, if you get out before you're still under the old contract. You guys are operating under the old contract now because of
Right.
Triborough, right?
That's
Is that
right.
correct? Okay. And the step increase is also, all of that is still going forward as it had been under the
but not
past.
for everybody. That's only a small percentage of the membership, because a lot of people have already reached the top of their steps.
How does that work then?
It works generally when you start state service and are hired at a job. Most people are hired at the job rate, the hiring rate.
Right.
And the theory is over a period of time that as you gain more experience and knowledge and learn the job better, that your salary goes up a little bit, up to what the rate would be if you were a totally experienced employee in that job title. But over at least 2/3 of the membership has probably exhausted their steps.
So they can't go any higher.
They can't go higher. But then after a 5-year period, they're eligible for what they call the longevity step. And there's a smaller amount that has been adjusted over 15 years, which for $1,250. And then if you're 10 years at the top of grade, then it goes up to $2,500. But those are rates that were set initially about 15 years ago.
Okay, so the governor, again, the governor said he wants us all to be revenue neutral. It doesn't sound to me like there's terribly a lot of room.
Well, the thing that I think is a little glaring, PEF members are the type of people that watch the news closely. I'm sure that it was lost on no PEF member that the day of the PEF vote, the governor gave $400 million to 5 multinational corporations on the promise of creating some jobs.
Right.
There's plenty of revenue for this state. We talk about not continuing the surcharge on the wealthiest, the income tax surcharge. But in fact, if New York went back to the progressive income tax structure of 40 years ago, there would be 14 tax brackets, right? The state would have no budget deficit, and taxes on the poorest 95% of us would go down if we had a progressive tax structure. Right now we have practically a flat tax structure where a married couple making $40,000 are in the top bracket. So I think that it's that kind of knowledge. You're talking about a union of professionals who know intimately how the state works. And so when we have this kind of discrepancy, these choices that are being made, to arbitrarily say that this amount of money has to come out of this union, what kind of an ultimatum is that?
We're almost out of time, unfortunately, and I know that this is really, and I mean unfortunately, because I know that this topic is so important to so many people who are watching and so many members, not just of PEF, but also of other unions, some of which have not yet, Council 82, for example, and UUP, some unions that this particular vote maybe emboldened them, maybe made things more difficult. CSEA members who were maybe questioning, like maybe we shouldn't have voted the way we did. I think it certainly is troublesome for a lot of different people. I just want to ask you, and either one of you, was this intended as a rebuke to Andrew Cuomo by the union?
Some people certainly had that motive. A lot of people were really angry at the governor for not following up on the millionaire's tax, and then having a degree of hypocrisy and praising Obama for going forward with a millionaire's tax, but not doing that for New York State. And one other thing in terms of revenue neutral, the governor hasn't responded, or his staff responded to PEF's data, cost-benefit analysis on the money from saving from getting rid of a lot of the contractors
Right.
that work for the
That's the
state.
perennial one that we've been talking about for a long time.
But by ignoring that, that's the fundamental question in my view, which is a question of our dignity.
Well, obviously not over this particular story by a long shot. So I want to thank you, Andy Coates. Thank you, Wayne
you.
Baer. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate your time, both of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.